Tonight on Bridge City News, many people showed up at Lethbridge City Hall today showing their support and concerns for our city's supervised consumption site. The province has announced that a new expert panel has been struck to hear those concerns from Albertans about the impact of supervised consumption sites. And People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier says he's confident that he'll make it into the federal leaders' debate.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. You may have heard a lot of shouting, cheering, and honking outside of Lethbridge City Hall this afternoon. The noise was both to protest and support a controversial motion that was being voted on during today's City Council meeting. Video journalist Naveen Day has the story.
On the afternoon, City Council is set to vote on a motion to ask the province to temporarily freeze funding for Lethbridge's supervised safe consumption and injection site. Crowds gathered to show support and to protest. The protest against the site was organized by a group called Lethbridge Citizens Alliance, a collection of businesses and citizens who have been negatively impacted by the site and want to see it closed down.
We have people coming forward who are not happy with this City Council, their lack of action, the increase in crime, the drug dealing that's rampant in this city. The city is not safe for its citizens, and especially it's not safe for our kids. We're really concerned about our kids.
I want to see them help, just like me. Get a bus downtown or wherever and get on that bus, take them to a place that's much safer outside the city where nobody can get hurt. In my alley was a guy on drugs just like these, just like the one I saw behind the paint shop. And he pulled a lady into the alley, repeatedly raped her, and then beat her over the head with a shovel repeatedly, and then stuffed her in a garbage can. And if somebody hadn't found her, she'd be dead today. And all I have to say to people is, dear God, do we have to see something like that happen again?
Meters away, a rally to support the site took place. Workers in the industry, harm reduction supporters, and politicians from as far as Edmonton were in attendance.
We've seen over the last few months, the UCP government has made it very clear that they're going to be reviewing the supervised consumption sites as well as mental health and addictions. And as a critic for this role, I felt it was important that I hear from all Albertans. This rally is extremely important because it brings the concerns of the citizens that are concerned about the issues that are surrounding the site, as well as the advocates for the site. So I wanted to make sure I was here to hear both sides.
This is Riley Dawson. This is my partner. He passed away October 22nd, 2016. He passed away from an opioid overdose. It's important because it saves lives. It keeps people alive because dead people can't recover. And not everybody is ready to get help at the time, so we need to keep people alive and meet them where they're at.
The outcome of the City Council votes is available for you to see on Bridge City News social media accounts. For BCN, I'm Naveen Day.
The Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce also got in on the action and expressed their concerns to Council.
When you think of a chair with one leg, it takes a wizard to be able to manipulate a chair with one leg. So when you think about the other three legs that we need intox, we need detox, we need housing, then you have that. So you're firmly putting somebody on a chair so they can be stable. We're asking people to be stable on a one-legged chair when they are probably at some of the most unstable times of their life.
The province announced today that 8 experts will hear from Albertans on the social and economic impacts of supervised consumption services on their communities. Associate Minister of Mental Health and Addictions Jason Lewan says the committee will set up town halls all over Alberta over the next 3 weeks in September to hear from citizens, business owners, and supervised consumption site operators. The information gathered will help the government decide the best steps moving forward in regards to provincial supervised injection sites. The town halls will take place in all communities with existing or proposed supervised consumption sites, including Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Red Deer, Calgary, and Edmonton. The UCP government said in the past it was freezing funding for proposed new sites for Medicine Hat, Red Deer, and a second site in Calgary. Many of you have taken to social media expressing your support or your concerns with the supervised consumption site at Arches. Here's what some of you had to say. Justin from Facebook says Lethbridge has become a joke, chalking up coke lines in the street and no one will stop them. Time to move? Who wants to raise kids in a city like this? From the Facebook page, Lethbridge Sports Harm Reduction. On today's rally, cheers of hey, hey, ho, ho, addiction stigma's gotta go. The mood was optimistic in front of City Hall. And Dan writes, "Why aren't we working together to solve the root problem? What I mean is to pressure the government to tighten borders from fentanyl getting in." There was another rally today in Lethbridge to protest Bill 9. The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees has been organizing rallies all throughout the summer and across the province to protest the bill that is delaying wage arbitration for provincial workers. Just weeks ago, a Supreme Court justice granted a temporary injunction of the bill. But as Jeanette Rocher reports, it has not put an end to the anger and frustration among the workers.
More signs and more chants today. This information picket outside of St. Mike's Health Centre is just another in a long series of rallies across the province this summer, and the second one in Lethbridge in just a matter of weeks. The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees has been protesting Jason Kenney's Bill 9, known as the Wage Deferral Bill, which postponed collective bargaining of wages for provincial workers.
It affects thousands and thousands of people and tax-paying Albertans that are affected by these contracts and everything else. So they need to realize that we're going to continue fighting this until it's gone.
And despite the fact that a judge granted AUPE a temporary injunction, which only halts Bill 9 for a short time, the provincial union has kept active in this fight.
So we did win the injunction, but of course Bill 9 is still alive and kicking. So, and until that happens, we're going to continue to be holding information pickets across the province.
But AUPE's fight is expanding into other areas, and more unions are piggybacking on the cause to show their support.
We would like to be treated fairly and with respect. Frontline workers are usually the ones in public sector unions, and we work really hard for our public, the people that we care for and represent. And we would just like the current government to come to the table and bargain fairly.
People in Alberta should take it personally. Any attack on the Charter rights and freedoms, no matter what it is or what motivates it, is an attack on all of us. But if you have a provincial government that's willing to use the power of the legislature to shred collective agreements in defiance of multiple Supreme Court decisions, you've got a provincial government that's anti-labor and needs to be stood up to.
Well, we hope that one of these days the UCP will realize that this bill actually was illegal, and they need to get rid of it and continue to bargain in good faith and not arbitrarily pass legislation to allow that to happen.
We reached out to representatives from the UCP government, but they were unavailable for comment by the time this went to air. For Bridge City News, I'm Jeanette Rocher.
When it comes to our healthcare in Canada, are we getting the best bang for our buck? Bacchus Brewer, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute, is studying that very question.
Ultimately, the only people who can answer that question are Canadians. But before they answer that question, they need that one important piece of information, which is how much are they actually spending on healthcare? And that's what we're trying to figure out today and help them understand that as an average family, you're probably spending about $13,000 for healthcare. It's up to you to figure out whether you're getting good value for your money.
Catch the full interview with Mr. Brewer as he also discusses the pros and cons of privatized healthcare. That's coming up after business news. Lethbridge police are asking anyone who witnessed an assault outside of a downtown bar to come forward. They say the incident occurred around 2:30 in the morning Sunday in front of Boss Hogs after a lone male was attacked by other males driving a white car along the 1200 block of First Avenue South. Police say the 25-year-old victim sustained head injuries and was transported to hospital. The investigation is ongoing, and police are asking anyone who witnessed the assault to call Sergeant Liam Breeden at 403-330-5162. It was all pancakes and power poles over the weekend as the city hosted a fundraising breakfast. The Saturday event was aimed at teaching the community what is involved in providing electricity that we sometimes take for granted.
So the event's hosted by the City of Lethbridge Electric Utility, and I want to thank all of our staff for taking time out of their day on the weekend to come out and share their experience with our customers. We have a very dedicated staff of about 90 people who do anything from take your request for having this service put in to some of the line technicians you see behind me working, who would be out in the poles or down in the ground making sure that the wires extended to your house or your business here in Lethbridge.
Proceeds from the breakfast went to the Lethbridge Harbour House. The provincial government cancelled a partnership with the Alberta Teachers Association on provincial curriculum development. The group says it was notified on Friday that a 2016 Memorandum of Understanding dealing with the curriculum was being terminated. Education Minister Adriana LaGrange confirmed the memorandum was being cancelled. She says she would not have signed it because it was too restrictive. She says it is important to open up the process so that more stakeholders are involved. Service Alberta Minister Nate Glubish will be in Lethbridge on Wednesday, hearing about concerns people have in our city and how those concerns affect their daily lives. The minister is on a province-wide tour, hearing challenges that Alberta communities face, from issues with broadband service in rural communities to mobile home tenancy issues. In a press release today, Minister Glubish said, "This tour is the first of its kind in more than 5 years, and it demonstrates this government's commitment to hear firsthand the unique concerns and proposals that Albertans have on the issues that affect them." Glubish is beginning his tour in Lloydminster tomorrow and will be in Lethbridge on Wednesday. Some of the other stops in southern Alberta include Brooks, High River, and the Crow's Nest Pass. A pipeline rupture caused a spill of more than 40,000 litres of oil near a creek south of Drayton Valley. The Alberta Energy Regulator says the spill took place Thursday on a Bonterra energy line. The Calgary-based company says it is removing the oil from Washout Creek with booms and vacuums. It has also placed additional booms where the creek meets the North Saskatchewan River as an extra precaution. The province says no impacts to wildlife were reported. 2 people were injured in a plane crash southwest of Calgary. RCMP were called out around noon to the crash site of a single-engine plane that took off from a rural airstrip near Black Diamond. They say it was on its way to High River but crashed in a field not far from where it took off. Police say 2 men on board suffered serious injuries but are expected to survive. While we've been enjoying hot summer-like conditions in southwestern Alberta, summer took a bit of a break in Saskatchewan over the weekend. Both Regina and Saskatoon broke long-standing records with lows of 2 degrees and just above zero. They were not even the coldest spots in the province. Last Mountain Lake recorded below freezing of minus 0.6, while North Battleford dipped to minus 0.5. Environment Canada says the low temperatures were the result of clear skies between 2 systems. Federal Conservative leader Andrew Scheer wants the RCMP to investigate whether Prime Minister Justin Trudeau obstructed justice in his handling of the SNC-Lavalin affair. Scheer is asking the Mounties to take another look in light of the Ethics Commissioner's report and the RCMP's previous involvement. Former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould says the RCMP contacted her in the spring regarding matters that first surfaced in February. That is when a published report says Trudeau's aides pressed her to intervene and help SNC-Lavalin avoid prosecution through a plea bargain type of deal. Maxime Bernier tells People's Party of Canada candidates and supporters he's confident he'll make it into the official leaders' debates this election. Bernier says excluding his voice will lead to a superficial debate because the other party leaders will agree on issues such as immigration and supply management of the dairy sector.
How can anyone think that the PPC does not deserve a place at the debate when you see what all the other options are? All these parties share more or less the same position on a series of issues that are at the center of political debates in Canada. I'm thinking about immigration, multiculturalism, free speech, equalization, the threat of radical Islam, corporate welfare, foreign aid, pro-UN globalism, deficit, CBC funding, climate change, supply management cartel. All the other political parties, they mostly agree on all these issues. The People's Party is the only party that has a totally different perspective, a perspective shared by a large minority of Canadians or by a majority of them, depending on the issue. It won't be a real debate if we are not there.
Elections Canada will not be making a blanket statement on whether talk about climate change becomes a partisan issue for third parties during the federal campaign. It says it will make decisions on a case-by-case basis and only if it receives complaints. PPC leader Maxime Bernier says climate change is not an emergency and that it is not caused by humans but rather natural. That could make an argument to the contrary a partisan statement under the law. Ontario Premier Doug Ford spoke about how changes made by his government have affected municipalities over the last year and what he has planned moving forward. After Ford paused this year's planned cuts to public health care and child care, it was unclear whether they would go ahead next year. His office now says some of those changes will take place on January 1st.
We believe in building a better province that actually starts with investing in its people. We need to help them, not with top-down approaches directed by Queen's Park, as I just said, but from the ground up. From the ground up, and that's why our government is committed to building strong local partnerships with our municipalities. We recognize our government moved quickly when we came into office to address our inherited challenges. But my friends, we're listening to you.
Relatives of those killed in the suicide bombing at a Kabul wedding Saturday night began to bury the dead on Sunday. The Islamic State group affiliate in Afghanistan claimed responsibility for the blast. They killed at least 63 people. Witnesses said the bomber was standing by a stage where children and others gathered when he detonated his explosives vest. Close to 200 were also wounded in the attack. The Greater Vancouver Zoo is one of the number of institutions that breed endangered species and release them back into the wild. Experts differ, however, as to the role of such programs in the ultimate survival of plants and animals.
During nesting season, we monitor the females, we take their measurements and make sure their population is still healthy and doing really well. And then when those females lay eggs, we've targeted specific sites that are at risk. So for example, like diking areas that might become flooded or are subject to roadworks, and we remove eggs from those areas. And then we take them back to the zoo and incubate them and raise them up until they're about 30 grams and ready for release. They do pretty well. They have about a 75% survival rate.
Around 40 industrial athletes from across Western Canada will be in Lethbridge this weekend to show off their tree climbing skills. These professional arborists who cultivate, manage, and study trees and bushes will show us how to get to the top, literally.
This is happening on the 24th and 25th in Kinsman Park, and it is an incredible event because it is so unique to the Lethbridge area. It's tree climbing championships. When you think of tree climbing in the prairies, you don't necessarily think about Lethbridge, but what's really interesting about this is it's a couple of arborists that are actually getting together and really demonstrating their skills. So it looks like a crazy fun event. It's something that's really unique that we haven't usually brought into Lethbridge, and it looks to be an amazing display of talent and skill. So if people are interested on that, there's more information on our website, tourismlethbridge.com, and you can check them out on the 24th and 25th.
Competitors will take part in 5 different events in the preliminary rounds, including the throw line, the work climb, the belayed speed climb, the ascent event, and the aerial rescue. Should be a very competitive event. We had lots of sunshine and hot again today. That should be the trend as we head into Whoop Up Days beginning tomorrow. Complete weather details are on deck. Another beautiful summer day in the city. Tonight mainly clear with a low near 8 degrees. Tomorrow lots of sunshine again for the Whoop Up Days parade, and we should see a high near 28. Wednesday even hotter with a high expected near 32. Some clouds will roll in on Thursday and the mercury will drop to 25. Friday warming up again to 28 degrees. A nice weekend is shaping up, sunny and 26 for Saturday, just a few clouds and 22 degrees for Sunday. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 25 and an average low of 10. The highest temperature on the state was recorded in 1942 at 33 degrees, and the record low was +1 in 1950. Sunrise was at 6:27, sunset at 8:43. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across the country now. Just a few clouds for Victoria, BC, and a high near 23. Mainly cloudy and 24 for Vancouver. Lots of blue sky and 24 as well for Calgary on Tuesday. Mainly sunny and 23 for Edmonton. Sunshine at 23 as well for both Regina and Saskatoon tomorrow. Just a few clouds and 24s on tap for Winnipeg. A chance of thunder showers at 27 for Toronto on Tuesday. Mainly sunny and 29 degrees for Ottawa. 1 degree cooler for Montreal. Partly cloudy and 26 for Fredericton, New Brunswick. Showers and 27 for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Rain at 25 degrees for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect showers with a high near 22 tomorrow. A complaint by a Canadian couple bumped from their flight from Edmonton to Italy has prompted some changes. The Canadian Transportation Agency launched an inquiry into how WestJet Airlines handles its passengers during schedule changes. WestJet reportedly told the couple they were not receiving compensation because the incident amounted to a flight delay rather than a denial of boarding. Under Canada's Passenger Bill of Rights, which was partially implemented on July 15th, a week before the flight, airlines have no obligation to pay customers for delays or cancellations out of its control. The agency says it has directed WestJet to provide information and will decide on next steps after it's been received. The Catalyst Capital Group has paid $187 million for nearly 18.5 million shares in Hudson's Bay Company. That works out to about 10.05% stake in the retailer. The investment firm is opposed to a proposal to privatize HBC, which says it is committed to working with a special committee reviewing a takeover offer from board chair Richard Baker. Catalyst says it will work with HBC's board to seek out every alternative that can maximize value for all shareholders. The Walt Disney Company will be launching its Disney Plus streaming service in Canada on November 12th. It says the service will be available on nearly all major mobile and connected TV devices for $8.99 a month or $89.99 per year. The streaming service will let users access Disney shows and movies from its various brands, including Pixar, Marvel, and Star Wars. A survey of American business economists shows that a number of them expect some of U.S. President Donald Trump's policies will plunge the U.S. into a recession. 34% of economists surveyed said they believe a slowing economy will tip into a recession in 2021. The financial market signaled the possibility of a U.S. recession last week, adding to concerns over the ongoing trade tensions and word that economies in Germany and Britain are shrinking. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, hundreds of people showed up at Lethbridge City Hall, both in support and against the safe consumption site at Arches. City Council was voting on a motion late today by Councillor Blaine Hagan asking the province to freeze funding to the consumption site. How does the current tax cost for healthcare compare to what it was like, let's say, 20 years ago? Bacchus Brewer, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute, has the numbers for us next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar for Whoop Up Days. The Interfaith Food Bank is hosting its 13th annual Whoop Up Days Pancake Breakfast, Tuesday, August 20th from 7 to 10 a.m. at 1103 3rd Avenue North. Enjoy delicious pancakes, sausages, eggs, beans, and fruit. Cost is $3 for adults and $2 for kids ages 4 to 12. Children 3 and under are free. There will also be live music, carnival games, crafts, a Western photo booth, and more. For details, visit interfaithfoodbank.ca. The Southern Alberta Community Living Association is holding a charity Whoop Up Days Pancake Breakfast on Wednesday, August 21st from 7:30 a.m. to noon. Enjoy fluffy pancakes as you listen to live music by the Mark Hall Band. The minimum cost is a $2 donation per person, with proceeds going towards SACLA's Discover the World Fund to help those with developmental disabilities. All are welcome to take part in a Whoop Up Days dance taking place Friday, August 23rd from 7 to 10:30 p.m. at the Army, Navy, and Air Force Veterans Club Hall, 517 5th Avenue South in Lethbridge. Enjoy live music by Faye Stevens. Cost is $10 per person. Plus, there will also be door prizes and a 50-50 draw. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
Canada is known around the world as a country that provides free health care to its citizens, but is it actually free? Of course, someone in fact is paying to build hospitals, buy equipment, medicine, and to pay medical professionals. That person is Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer. My guest now is Bacchus Brewer, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute in Vancouver, BC. Welcome back to BCN, Bacchus.
Thank you so much for having me on the show again. It's lovely to see you again.
You too. Healthcare is the costliest part of many governments' budgets, but do Canadians understand how much each of us is putting towards healthcare costs?
You know, it's a remarkably difficult thing to do. We don't really have a dedicated health insurance tax. We don't really experience fees when we go to hospitals. And it's contributed to this myth that we have a free healthcare system, or at least that's how other people in other countries refer to it. I think most Canadians know that we do pay something for our healthcare system. The question, of course, is how much.
Yeah, how much is the average family paying in taxes for the healthcare system? And by healthcare, what would that actually include? Would it be dentists and pharmaceutical costs?
So what we did in this study is we looked at the cost of the public healthcare system. So this is everything that Canadians contribute for basic core medical healthcare services. So it doesn't really include costs for things like dentists or pharmaceuticals that are got outside the system. But when we take all of it together, we find that the average family is actually contributing about $13,300. So sorry, $13,300 for the average family of four. The average unattached individual, single person, is paying about $4,500 for the public healthcare system. We can talk about whether this is a really high number or a really low number, but it's certainly in stark contrast to the notion of free healthcare.
Yeah, how does it really compare to other countries around the world, including the United States and countries in Europe?
Well, it's very difficult to do an apples to apples comparison when we're looking at the cost for our public healthcare system for each one of these families. The best that we can do is actually look at the total cost of our healthcare system. And we routinely do that by looking at Canada compared to other countries with universal healthcare. And yes, there are at least 27 other countries with universal healthcare. And when we look at Canada in that cohort, we actually usually stack up amongst the top spenders. We're spending upwards of 11% of our GDP and ranking between 4 and 11 out of 28. Depending on which measure we look at. Again, very different from the notion of free healthcare system, and actually one of the most expensive healthcare systems amongst universal healthcare countries.
You know, what's interesting too is that my wife had to have some heart surgery recently, and we looked at in Canada here, it was all covered, of course. We're very blessed and very thankful for that. But that same surgery in the United States would have been $120,000 without insurance. So it really is an eye-opener for a lot of Canadians, when we realized how blessed we really are.
Well, I'm sure if that same surgery in the United States was covered by private insurance or Medicare or something like that, again, people wouldn't be paying it out of pocket. So it's really a question of insurance coverage. But that's why I think the conversation of, about us centering it between Canada and the United States really leads to a lot of misleading conclusions. Canada really should be compared with other countries with universal healthcare. So countries like Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, Australia, France. They all have universal healthcare. They're spending about the same as we are in that cohort, but they actually routinely have more doctors, they have more beds, they have far shorter wait times than we do, and they have roughly the same, if not better, outcomes. So once we start to get that comparison into question and we realize that, okay, we can have universal coverage, it doesn't really require a public monopoly over it. We can also do it through private providers. And then we tweak the question to, how do we actually just get the best healthcare system that delivers timely access to care, regardless of ability to pay, but without really necessitating it to be either government or private. It's really about what delivers the best care to Canadians. But again, even before we get into those conversations, a fundamental part of that equation is how much are we actually putting into that system? And I think a lot of Canadians would be quite surprised to know that they're actually contributing $13,000 towards their healthcare system this year. And then when you take that cost, it becomes a question of, okay, well, are you actually getting good value for your money?
So how did you actually come up with the number of $13,000? Because, in Canada, we don't actually have the direct dedicated health taxes.
Yeah, it's actually remarkably difficult to do that. And that's one of the reasons why Canadians also have a tough time with it. We do have two good statistics that we can look at. We can look at the overall cost of our public healthcare system. So that's about $160 billion. And we do have a general idea about how much the tax burden is for different families. So, for example, for a single individual and for a family of four. And once we combine those two numbers, we get a general rough estimate of how much these families are contributing through the tax system. And it's important to put a caveat over here and remind viewers that we're paying for the healthcare system not just through our income taxes or through healthcare premium. We're paying for it through a multitude of different taxes that we see as sales taxes or employment taxes and a variety of different things. It all goes into general government revenues, which makes it very difficult to try and figure out. But our best estimates are that the average family of four is spending about $13,000 for healthcare. And of course, it does vary by income. at the bottom 10% of income earners are probably contributing about $500 a year, whereas the top 10% of income earners are actually contributing upwards of almost $40,000 a year.
So Bacchus, can you give some perspective on how much healthcare costs have really increased in Canada?
Yeah, we're very fortunate to be able to calculate these figures all the way back to about 1997. And what we see is that when we take all the families combined, healthcare spending has actually grown about 3 times as fast as the cost of, for example, food. It's grown about twice as fast as expenses for clothing and shelter. And importantly, it's grown faster than incomes. So if we just take total healthcare spending, it's grown by about 184% for the average family, whereas their incomes have only grown by about 106%. So, there's that clear imbalance over here. Was telling you a little bit about the sustainability of these increases over time.
So how does the current tax for healthcare compare to what it was like, let's say, 20 years ago?
Well, the interesting thing is that if we look at just the last couple of years, we've seen a bit of a slowdown in the increases of healthcare spending for the average family. But this has come on top of dramatic increases in spending throughout most of the 2000s. So again, when we contrast it for healthcare for the average family, it grew by 180% since 1997, but incomes only grew by about 100% since 1997. So even though it's slowed down a little bit over the last couple of years, that's on top of skyrocketing increases throughout most of the 2000s.
So what kind of an impact is this really having on Canadian families? Are people saying, you know what, we're going to have to do with less food to pay for a lot of our health care?
Well, I think this is something that a lot of governments are starting to struggle with. You can't have infinitely increasing expenditures on healthcare without something else having to give way. Either governments are going to have to increase taxation, or you're going to reach limits on how much you can spend on other social programs. What we're seeing right now is that governments have basically started to slow down their increases of healthcare spending. So it's still increasing, but at a slower rate. And of course, we see the result of that, which is rationing of services. At the same time as these increases have taken place, so have there been increases in the average wait for treatment. For example, the average wait for treatment was about 19.8 weeks the last time we did the survey last year. And I don't remember the number in 1997, but in 1993, when we started that survey, the wait was only 9.3 weeks. So, large increases in wait time over the last 2 or 3 decades. At the same time, we're actually seeing increases in spending. So there's a mismatch somewhere between what we're putting into the system and what we're getting in return.
So the bottom line back is, why are healthcare costs rising at a much faster rate than practically everything else in our country?
I think that's a really good question for Canadians to ask themselves, for policymakers to actually to ask as well. The question really is that the increases in spending is one part of the equation, and they could be fine. It's fine to have increases if you're getting commensurate value in return. If you're starting to see decreases in wait times, if you're starting to see huge increases in the number of physicians or MRI scanners, but we're not seeing that. We're seeing an imbalance where on the one hand, we're increasing our spending, but on the other hand, we're also seeing longer wait times for care. And the simple answer to that is we really haven't seen any shifts in policy. This is an old approach of throwing money at a problem and hoping it goes away. And that just doesn't really seem to work.
What's really interesting is the fact that a lot less Canadians are smoking today, which you would think would have a lot less of a burden on our healthcare system. So maybe costs should be coming down instead of going up.
That's something that we haven't really looked at in terms of actual population health and what that does to healthcare costs. That's what one should expect and would hope would happen. But this is really a question of, we have a system where the incentives are such that there is no tempering of demand. We have no cost sharing, and so you have essentially infinite demand for services. You have limitations in the supply of services because there is only a single payer. Essentially government, or there are many payers in terms of us being taxpayers. But that leads to an imbalance between supply and demand, and that's why we see the rationing that we do in terms of things like long wait times.
It seems that in Canada, as soon as we use the term private, is used in healthcare discussions, governments panic and they're worried about losing votes. Any thoughts on how that could possibly change?
I think we're increasingly aware of how universal healthcare is done in other countries. I think Canadians have a better understanding of the fact that universal healthcare doesn't necessarily mean government healthcare. We can see successful countries like Switzerland, the Netherlands, Germany, all having universal healthcare systems where they embrace the private sector, where they have co-payments and cost sharing, and the results are clear. While they're spending about the same as we do, they have more physicians, more beds, shorter wait times. I think we're going to be a lot more open to having these conversations in the future.
What do you say to those people that say, though, you're creating a two-tiered healthcare system?
Well, we already have a multi-tiered healthcare system. And in particular, we have a system where if you're rich enough, you can escape our healthcare system's problems by going to a different country. That's really not how you want to design healthcare. Essentially, I would hope that people design a healthcare system where rather than the preservation of the system, we put patients first and say, look, it doesn't matter whether it's public or private or if they're co-payments. We want to ensure that patients are getting adequate treatment in a timely manner. And of course, when we talk about things like co-payments, all these countries have exemptions for vulnerable populations. It's an understanding that these are important signals to send, while still understanding that we want to make sure that nobody has a huge cost burden for healthcare. There are other ways to do it. Other countries have figured it out, and we should look at what they're doing.
So Bacchus, what can we learn from provinces that have already experimented to some degree with private healthcare? Has it been successful?
There's one province that actually has thought outside the box and had a fair amount of success with private healthcare, and that's Saskatchewan. In the late 2000s, Saskatchewan had some of the longest wait times for healthcare in Canada. They started something called the Saskatchewan Surgical Initiative, which, amongst other things, actually contracted services out to private clinics. They also started a pool referral system, and the outcome was very clear. By about 2014 or 15, they actually had the shortest wait times in the country. Now, of course, there are limits on what Saskatchewan could do within the confines of the Canada Health Act, but it provides us a very simple example of how we could improve healthcare in our country within the confines of the Canada Health Act.
Have there been any real issues, any difficulties when it comes to private healthcare so far in our country?
There's nothing really that we've seen. Most of these other countries introduce private healthcare in a regulated market. They understand that it's a partner that needs to ensure that it's delivering services to patients regardless of ability to pay. And as far as we've seen, there really aren't significant issues with delivering treatment across the income spectrum in countries like Switzerland, Germany, and the Netherlands.
Are Canadians getting good value for the amount of taxes spent on healthcare? What are your thoughts?
Well, let me answer that in two ways. In the pure statistical way, we see very clearly that we are one of the high spenders, but we have very few medical resources and we have some of the longest wait times. So in that sense, we're not getting good value for money. But ultimately, the only people who can answer that question are Canadians. But before they answer that question, they need that one important piece of information, which is how much are they actually spending on healthcare? And that's what we're trying to figure out today and help them understand that as an average family, you're probably spending about $13,000 for healthcare. It's up to you to figure out whether you're getting good value for your money.
Is there anything changing on the Canadian landscape in relation to healthcare? Is there an appetite for allowing maybe more private healthcare into the mix?
Well, I think the newer generation is far more open to the concept of private healthcare, especially as not really seeing it antithetical to universal healthcare. We're seeing court cases fought in BC with Dr. Brian Day's clinic, who's fighting for patients' right to get treated in a timely fashion when the public system fails. We also have a generation where we're used to having timely services delivered across the spectrum, and I'm sure that same attitude is going to come to healthcare. And of course, it's important to remember that does not have to stand against the concept of universality. There are other countries who've figured it out, who are using the private sector to deliver the universal healthcare promise.
Bacchus Barua, the Associate Director of Health Policy Studies at the Fraser Institute. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Vancouver, British Columbia.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
It seems that more people are turning to natural foods and as well naturopathic medicine. But there are also some concerns about whether or not naturopathic route is the legitimate medical treatment route. We're joined now in studio by Dr. Clayton Cogano. He's a naturopathic doctor in Lethbridge with Meridian Integrated Health and Wellness Center. He's also done some training in conventional medicine with a Bachelor of Science in exercise science kinesiology, and doing 3 years of research on radiation and cancer at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Doc, what kinds of concerns are you hearing when it comes to naturopathic treatments? Do people say, this guy's a snake oil salesman, it's not going to work?
It's a little difficult to answer that question because the patients that come into my office, they're already educated on everything that I can do. They're educated on all of the conventional therapies that I can do, as well as the alternative therapies. But I think in general, it's mostly a matter of people being worried about safety and efficacy of our treatments. We have a lot of education to back us up. We have 4 years
studies as well.
And studies on top of that. We're trained 4 years in a conventional undergraduate degree, plus another 4 years in at a medical school of naturopathic medicine. And there's 2 in Canada that you can go to. And so I think that in terms of safety, we just have to look at the fact that naturopathic doctors are probably one of the most trained in alternative medicines that are out there.
Now, you've worked in conventional medicine versus the naturopathic route as well. And so how did you bridge that gap then?
So in terms of I am trained as a naturopathic doctor. So I'm not trained as a conventional doctor, although we are trained in conventional medicine. I've done different clinical rotations at walk-in clinics in conventional medicine alongside medical doctors. So I like that training because it offers me sort of a glimpse into what medical doctors can do when they're going to do it, as well as I have the knowledge in naturopathic medicine.
Do you ever have some of those conventional medicine doctors send you patients, like referrals?
Yes, I do. Actually, when I moved to Lethbridge, it was quite a big surprise. I wasn't expecting it. But right off the bat, I actually had a lot of medical doctors sending me patients. And I found that the more I educated the medical doctors and the medical community, the more they were open and willing because they knew my education. So,
but you also must run into some doctors, old school doctors, who really don't believe in naturopathic remedies.
Absolutely. It's on us, though, in order to educate them. And to me, it's more about using remedies or different therapies that have studies to back them up.
Have you sent patients as well the other way?
Yes.
Conventional doctors?
Oh, all the time. I send patients sometimes to the emergency room when they come in. I just had a patient a few weeks ago, and he came in and he thought that he was just having heartburn. And I fixed his heartburn, I think, back in 2012, and he came in and I took his blood pressure and he was having a hypertensive crisis.
Oh my goodness.
And he had to go to the ER immediately. And so I called the ER and let them know he was coming. I love working with medical doctors. So yeah, I also send referrals to medical doctors to do different lab tests, different imaging, whatever needs to be done in order to help a patient. And I find it just works better that way.
How about some of the naturopathic remedies? I know a lot of us have chronic pain,
yeah.
Whether from, like, I used to play a lot of football in my days, and
yeah.
I still have some of that pain to this day, many years later.
Yeah.
And some of our viewers are also more mature, some seniors that watch our program.
Yes.
So what would you recommend when it comes to pain?
Yeah, so the majority of my practice actually comprises of chronic pain. There's a lot of different things that you can do for chronic pain that are out there. Physiotherapy, acupuncture. One of the things that I do, it's called a regenerative injection, and there's different types. There's stem cell regenerative injections, there's prolotherapy, which is a solution of dextrose, lidocaine, and water, and there's platelet-rich plasma. And all of these have different strengths, but what they do is they aim to regenerate tissue that otherwise wouldn't heal. So that would be ligament, tendon, and cartilage.
How about glucosamine? Does that actually help too?
Glucosamine. The difficulty with glucosamine, it works in some of my patients, but not all of them. I'd say it's 50-50, and I don't overly recommend it. There's better therapies out there, I think. But if somebody's on glucosamine, usually what I'll say is, do you notice a difference? And if they do,
with their joints, perhaps?
Fantastic. If they don't, then I say, go off of it for a month and see if you notice it getting worse. And if you do, go back on it. If not, then go off of it. Stop spending money on it. I don't want patients on supplements unnecessarily. But with something like prolotherapy, its effective rate is 85%, and that's across North America. And clinically, I see that easily hit. And these are permanent therapies, by and large, permanent, meaning once they work, they rarely wear off. And if they do, you may need a touch-up or two, but they're regenerating the tissue, the underlying tissue. And the other great thing about it is because it's treating something that physiotherapy and acupuncture or chiropractic adjustments or other alternative medicines don't, they can be utilized with those therapies. And so the contraindications to it are slim, next to none.
Now, we talked about chronic pain. What about chronic fatigue? How can you help a lot of your patients in that regard?
Chronic
Naturally
fatigue,
speaking.
yeah. So I do see a ton of chronic fatigue as well. It's really prevalent today.
Is it low testosterone levels, perhaps? Like with males sometimes?
Well, it's a good question. When I first see a patient with chronic fatigue, I do a lot of lab testing because it's often not one thing. It could be they have low iron, they have low thyroid, they have low testosterone, and perhaps if it's a woman, it's estrogen, or it's cortisol, or even a hormone called DHEA. There's a lot of reasons to it, and so unless we do that lab testing, we'll never know exactly. You might find a patient has low iron, but unless you check their thyroid at the same time, you're doing them a disservice because you're only finding out, right? Half of the issue.
Yeah.
So as soon as we find the causative agents and reasons why these people are tired, you can fix it.
What about when it comes to allergy testing? Can you help a lot of your patients in that regard too?
Yes, and there's many different types of allergies out there. And a lot of people don't understand that. They don't realize that. There's anaphylactic type allergies, and that's much more conventional approach. Of course, you don't want to have an anaphylactic reaction.
What
That's
are some
an
of those
emergency. Like peanuts, bee stings, for example. Those are things that are emergent. You either use an EpiPen or go to the hospital. But then there's other types of allergies. There's IgG, there's IgA, there's cellular mediated type allergies.
And what are those allergies specifically? Give us
Well,
some examples.
these allergies can be checked in the blood. They're medically accredited as well. And typically, well, it varies from person to person.
Are those environmental or are those still food allergies?
Those are food allergies, and
Okay.
often they lead to systemic, widespread symptoms in your body, like digestive tract issues, irritable bowel syndrome. And I think that this is another big part of my practice is patients will come in and they'll say, I have irritable bowel.
IBS.
Thank you for telling me it's irritated, but what's causing it? What's creating that irritation? And so it's up to me to figure out what is irritating their digestive tract so that then I can treat it and fix it. And that's why I like to utilize lab testing for things like that.
I hear a lot of people nowadays, myself included, lactose intolerant.
Right.
You hear that a lot. Do you ever have patients come to you as well, say, I love the dairy, I love the cheese, I love my milkshakes, I love the butter, but...
Pretty well you can assume that roughly, statistically, about 80% of the population is lactose intolerant.
Wow.
Yeah, and that is to a sugar. And an allergy, when we do a food allergy test or even an environmental allergy test, that is to a protein. And the difference is that when you eliminate, say, for example, dairy from your diet because you're lactose, you still may have irritable bowel from a protein. And so the blood testing for that is really beneficial for patients that have already eliminated the fact if they are lactose intolerant, but they're still having digestive issues.
So do you do lab tests as well with your practice?
Every single day. Yeah, every single day.
What does that look like?
Well, patient will come in and we'll do a 1-hour consult, and then we develop a plan for that patient. And in that, I love to use lab testing. We have to use it with a grain of salt. It has to make sense from their clinical picture, and also we don't want to get overzealous on making them do lab testing they don't need either. There has to be a balance. But lab testing allows us to direct treatment plan as well as dosage, form of a supplement, and it provides a better result for a patient.
What about nutraceuticals? A lot of people are taking them. Can you explain to our viewers what they are exactly?
Yeah, so nutraceuticals are either combinations of vitamins or herbs or both together. They can be extremely effective. I can see a patient, if I look at their lab, say, for example, their thyroid is low. We can improve their thyroid function with a nutraceutical so that they don't need a pharmaceutical. But if their thyroid reaches, say, a certain point, there's a cutoff in which we know as naturopathic doctors, this is not going to be strong enough. You need a pharmaceutical in order to fix this. Similarly, cholesterol, they are extremely effective if taken in the right dose, in the right form. And it's unfortunate because a lot of my patients will come in on our initial visit and they'll bring in garbage bags full of supplements.
Oh, wow.
It's really, yeah, and it's really unfortunate because
And a lot of them are just garbage, aren't they? Maybe that's why they're in garbage bags.
Exactly. Yeah, and I usually,
They're not very effective.
yeah, I tell them to go off them because if they did work for them, they wouldn't be seeing me. So that's when I utilize lab testing to figure out, okay, what is actually happening with this patient? And then can I fix them with nutraceuticals or prolotherapy or regenerative injection or something? And if I can, fantastic. And if I can't, then I know who to refer to.
We had an optometrist on our show the other day talking about glaucoma, cataracts, and just proper eye health.
Yeah.
What about naturopathic remedies that can help with our eyes?
Yeah. So you can use lutein, you can use vitamin A. Typically, we'll use a high-dose omega-3. And there's certain ones out there that I personally like ones that are third-party tested for heavy metals, impurities, toxins, but also dosage. You want a really high dosage of EPA and DHA. That's the most important part of an omega-3. And so even, for example, if the absorbability of it is lower, if the potency of it is higher, then you need to take a lesser dosage to attain a proper result. If you don't get a high enough dosage in certain supplements, then within a safety range, of course, then a lot of times you won't see any effectiveness with that supplement.
Now let's talk about cancer. We all know somebody that's either battled cancer or unfortunately passed away from cancer. What about cancer patients that come and see you? How does that look?
I do see a lot of cancer patients, and a lot of times they're quite surprised when they come and see me because the population group that I'm seeing is such that often is scared of conventional medicine. And cancer is one of those things that it's quite terrifying for people, and it's overwhelming for people.
It is.
And so a lot of times they'll shy away because they feel intimidated by conventional medicine, at least the patients that I'm seeing. And I can sort of act as a good bridge between the conventional and the alternative world in this case, because I often try my absolute best to tell them that the medical doctors are trying also their best to help them, and that chemotherapy and radiation therapy and surgery are our best methods for curing cancer right now and fixing it. And nothing's guaranteed with cancer. And so,
but how about for those patients that come to you and say, I don't want to go through chemotherapy.
Right.
I saw what it did to my mother, my father.
It's true.
I don't want to do radiation.
Yeah.
What alternatives are there?
Well, there are many alternatives, and there's also things that work very well in conjunction with. So my first approach is to say, what are you worried about? As a patient with cancer, what are you worried about with the conventional world? And a lot of them are worried about side effects. Well,
losing your hair, metallic taste.
Yes,
like
or just getting infection. Like a lot of times, like chemo and radiation will lower your white blood cells. But in the naturopathic world, in the nutraceutical world, we can do things to increase their white blood cell, or things that are researched, very well established now, that will enhance chemotherapy while lowering side effects, so that that patient will be able to go through their chemo or the radiation without having side effects. Or things, even just for example, like mouth sores from radiation therapy. There's different things that we can do, like glutamine has fantastic studies, licorice root has fantastic studies to help heal wounds from chemo and radiation. And so I think that you can easily use a combination of the two very safely and very effectively.
Are there any dietary recommendations for people who are battling cancer?
Yeah, so this is a huge topic because a lot of the patients that I see, they're terrified about eating sugar. And it's a big misconception Because yes, you don't want to be eating junk food every day if you have cancer. You need nutrients. You do also need calories. And so what I tell my patients, by and large, is if it runs on the earth or grows in a tree, grows in the ground, you can eat it. Otherwise, don't eat it, or eat it in less amounts. And I think that it simplifies it for them because they don't need complex. They need simple. There's too much going on for those patients. I don't think you have to overly complicate it. Nutrition for cancer patients just has to be fruits, vegetables, lean meats, and you know what? If they want that cookie, they can have the cookie, but just don't eat them all the time.
Right. Don't deny them that
But that's
pleasure.
for everybody.
Like in moderation, like Mom always says, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Dr. Clayton Coggino, naturopathic doctor in Lethbridge with Meridian Integrated Health and Wellness Center. Thanks a lot for joining me today in studio for Bridge City News.
Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, be well.